Okay, today's video is really cool. Today we're going to talk about how Thomas Jefferson, the Buddha, and Jesus Christ are all related. I don't mean like familial related. But before we get into today's video, you know what we're about to do? We're going to meditate, me and you right now, for 10 to 15 seconds, just to get ourselves grounded and centered, to have a moment of peace so we can go into this video with a peaceful and happy mind. So when I ring this bell right here, I want you to close your eyes and I want you to just feel the breath coming in and out of your body for about 15 seconds. Here we go. Wasn't that nice? Okay, let's begin. In today's video, here is what we're going to talk about. The first, we are going to discuss the epiphany that I had last night and how it led me to discover one of America's ancient artifacts that I never knew anything about. Then we're going to discuss how that then led me to understand how Jesus Christ and the Buddha are really not that different. And then from there, we're going to discuss the moral teachings of the Buddha as well as Jesus Christ so you can understand how they are similar. And then we can apply that to our lives so we can live more peacefully, more happily, and just be better people. Last night, I'm sitting there scrolling on my phone, looking into the US Senate. I wanted to learn and refresh my memory about how our government works because I'm looking to be a bit more politically active right now. As I'm scrolling through learning about the US Senate, I come across a very interesting artifact. It's called the Thomas Jefferson Bible. Thomas Jefferson is the second president of the United States and one of the founding fathers. Side note, he's actually my favorite president. So anytime I learn something about Thomas Jefferson, I usually find myself enjoying it. Some of you may or may not know as well that he was a tinkerer. He was an inventor. He came up with all these fun little inventions and all these little things that he used to do. And one of his projects was called the Thomas Jefferson Bible. And he did something that I have never heard anybody doing before. He took a King James Bible and over the period of about 10 years and 2 attempts, he cut certain pieces out of that Bible to make and rewrite the Bible to be the Thomas Jefferson Bible. Now, what's important here is what pieces of the Bible he actually cut out. So when he was going through the Bible, he specifically cut out any pieces that mentioned anything about miracles or miraculous events. Specifically, he wanted to highlight the moral teachings of Jesus Christ because he felt that those were the most important pieces of the Bible. What I also found out that was really interesting is that congressional members of Congress are actually given this Bible when they get elected. From 1907 to 1950, Congress would print this Bible and send it to people in the mail that got elected into Senate and into the House of Representatives. After 1950, it stopped for whatever reason, maybe because they didn't want to fund it anymore, but in 1997, an independent printing press started it back up, and to this day, congressional members are given the Thomas Jefferson Bible when they get elected. Whether they read it or not, I think is somewhat clear, but the main piece is that they are given this Bible, and this Bible explains the moral teachings of Jesus Christ. How does this relate to the Buddha? Well, first, I have to give you a quick background into Buddhism if you don't already know. The whole goal in Buddhism is to become an enlightened being. So when somebody like me or you studies Buddhism, we are actually studying and practicing on becoming a Buddha ourselves. The Buddha does not give anything to you. The Buddha just lays out a path or a practice that you must follow if you want to become enlightened. Funny enough, many people actually believe that Jesus Christ was just another enlightened being. And some go as far to say that he actually visited Asia to learn some of these teachings and then brought them back to the West. Also, it's important to note that the Buddha came before Jesus Christ, so perhaps this would be a true situation, but of course we'll never know. And another thing to know, which I just think is kind of tongue-in-cheek funny, is that Thomas Jefferson was part of the American Enlightenment movement. So in my mind, that just means that he understood certain things that other people did not, and he worked his entire life to teach people those things and to build an infrastructure and a government for people to be able to be free, to separate church and state, and to live free, liberated lives. So after I learned about the Thomas Jefferson Bible, I was really curious to see what Thomas Jefferson was trying to highlight in the teachings of Jesus. And when I did a little bit more research, I found that mainly in the Bible, the Thomas Jefferson Bible, the main part of the Bible is based on Sermon on the Mount, which was very new to me. I've never heard of this before, but it is a Christian scripture. It's a few different books in the Bible put together, and it is pretty much the morality, the teachings of morals given by Jesus, specifically in this one sermon where he was on the Mount, and he said certain things that were teachings on how to be moral, how to live a moral life. And as I started reading about it, I started connecting so many dots and so many links into the Buddhist teachings of sila, which also means morality. There are 3 pieces of Buddhism that you must follow to practice to get to enlightenment. The first is sila, morality. The second is samadhi, concentration. And the final is pagna, or wisdom. These 3 levels stack on top of each other, and we'll talk a little bit more about them later, but right now I want to focus on the bottom level, sila. Sila is based on the 5 precepts in Buddhism, which are do not steal, do not kill, do not commit sexual misconduct, do not lie, and do not become intoxicated. Let's go through some of the similarities of the Sermon on the Mount and the Buddhist teachings. First chapter in the Sermon on the Mount, and something I see a similarity with Buddhism, is blessed are thee. So pretty much as a summary, Jesus here says that there is a promise of blessing for those who live like Jesus. Those who live like Jesus are the happiest on earth. The Buddha says something very similar in the sense that if you follow the Dhamma, if you follow the teachings, you will become enlightened. Becoming enlightened means you are happy, you are compassionate, and you are at peace. Another similarity in one of the chapters, don't be angry with people. Reconciliation is the way of the kingdom because Jesus is into long-term relationships, and without reconciliation, there are no long-term relationships. To be a kingdom citizen is to learn and to forgive and to be a gracious person. In Buddhism, there is a lot of understanding in this exact same thing. We have to have what's called right view and right action and right speech. These are things about not saying anything mean to anybody, not doing any harm to anybody, like killing or committing sexual misconduct, but furthermore, having the right view. And this relates to what is called the Four Noble Truths. The truth that everybody is suffering. If you are experiencing attachment, or aversion, if you are clinging on to any experience, you are suffering. If you hate something or if you want to get more of something, you are suffering. So in order for us not to suffer, we need to be the opposite of those 2 evils. The opposite of greed is generosity, and the opposite of hatred is compassion. So right here, to be a gracious person, do not be angry with people. Be gracious, be compassionate, give them grace, let them be as they are, understand it is their suffering, not yours, and you do not have to partake. What I really like about Buddhism, though, is that it's really, really rooted in a followable, easy to understand path. It's something that's, the instructions are right there laid out for you. So like I said, if you just learn about the teachings, you can understand that everybody is suffering, and then you can learn the antidotes to that suffering. Compassion and generosity. The next chapter, don't commit sexual immorality. I mentioned earlier that Buddhism has 5 precepts, and one of those precepts is do not commit sexual misconduct. This means doing anything where somebody gets hurt. So not hurting somebody else by performing a sexual act with someone that's not agreed upon, right? Cheating, being a flirt, you're hurting others in that moment, and by doing so, you're also accruing bad karma. But in Christianity, more specifically, it's talking about adultery and sexual sins. It also talks a little bit about divorce and how that can lead to adultery. And while that's not really talked about in Buddhism, I think in a way they're trying to say that sexual misconduct can still be found because if a person gets divorced, they're not monogamous anymore. They should be together. They took the oath to be together. Now they're not. So don't get divorced, because if you do, then once you have sex with someone else, you're committing adultery. But from a Buddhist standpoint, as long as you're being kind, compassionate, and acting out of love, it's okay. As long as you're not accruing bad karma through a negative or unwholesome mental state, meaning as long as you're not holding greed or hatred in those moments towards those people, then you're okay. So pretty much if you divorce somebody, you can go sleep with other people, but as long as there's a general understanding that that's okay, and as long as you're not doing it out of spite or hatred. The next chapter, oaths. Jesus wants us to be the people who honor our commitments by doing what we'll say we'll do. Let our yes be yes. So right there, Jesus is pretty much saying, don't lie. Do as you say you are going to do. And in Buddhism, one of the 5 precepts is don't lie. So again, Jesus and the Buddha are saying the same thing. In Buddhism specifically, you don't want to lie because that can accrue bad karma or karma. Jesus doesn't mention anything about that, of course, but at the same time, he is giving you a path towards the kingdom of heaven. The Buddha said the same exact thing. If you want to be enlightened, don't lie. That's going to create bad karma. That's going to knock you off the path to enlightenment. And furthermore, in Buddhism, you're going to be reborn again and again and again because of that bad karma. Because remember, karma is what leads to being rebirthed again and again. The next chapter, Retaliation. Operate in the opposite spirit by loving when someone hates, blessing when someone curses, and turning the cheek when someone hits. So in Buddhism, compassion and generosity, like I mentioned, are key principles. We understand that everyone is suffering. So when someone is mean or hateful towards us, it is because they are suffering, because they are ignorant to the truth that the more that you cling to that thing, the more you will suffer. Furthermore, we should all just love each other and be generous to one another. And that's exactly what Jesus talks about a little bit later. But the main point I want you to understand is that Jesus is saying when someone hurts you, turn the other cheek. When someone curses, you bless. When someone hates, you love. That's the only way you're going to stop evil in the world. So in Buddhism, this is the antidote to the poison. The opposite of hatred is compassion. Jesus is saying when someone hates, you love. Very similar, pretty much the exact same thing, almost word for word. The next chapter, loving your enemies. This is the ultimate test of divine love. Anyone can love their friend, even wicked people, rather than the evidence of God's love in us and our ability to even love those who hate us. This one's really big to me because a lot of times I see people talk about be kind to one another, love each other, choose happiness, choose love. But that's very easily said when you're around a friend. But how can you choose love when you're around an enemy or someone who hates you or someone who's being mean to you or treating you poorly? That's the real test. And that's what Jesus here is talking about. The reason it's a big deal to me, though, and the reason I'm so passionate about Buddhist philosophy and psychology is because Buddhist philosophy and psychology gives you the direction on how to do that. There are instructions clearly on how to love your enemy, on how to be kind to those who are mean to you. And remember, it's a practice, and that's why we practice our morality. That's why we practice our meditation for concentration, and that's why we meditate to understand the wisdom of the truth of the Dhamma. Remember, Dhamma just means truth. It means the reality. It means the nature of all things. The next chapter, giving to the needy. Give and be generous to the needy. Don't do it to boast to others. God loves just living with an audience of one. This is a huge one in Buddhism. It's called dana. And dana just means generosity. So giving to a monk, giving to somebody who's poor, giving to a beggar is very important in Buddhism because you are building good karma, good merits to push you into a better life so you can practice the Dhamma and you can reach enlightenment. Just as Jesus says, but don't boast about it, the Buddha also says the same thing, just in different words. As you start to donate and be generous, your goal is not to do it to inflate your own ego, but you're doing it out of compassion for others. If you do it with that egoic mind state, you're actually going to be building bad karma because you're coming from a place of greed. You're trying to build up yourself. You want something out of the situation. Instead, you should approach it from a place of just generosity and compassion and just being happy to give to a person who needs it. Another later chapter, I see a similarity. Lay up treasures in heaven. Kingdom citizens have kingdom perspectives on value, and that means not valuing things that we hear purchase on earth. Jesus here is talking about materialistic items. He talks about food and clothing and saying that food is food and clothing is clothing. I'm not saying that you can't enjoy a nice meal or some nice clothes, but it's good to understand that at its core, these clothes and that food are really just sustenance and things for necessity. What's funny is the Buddha talks a lot about this as well. From a monk's perspective, for example, you are a beggar. So whatever food is given to you, you are just supposed to accept and enjoy or just accept and eat because in the end, it's just for sustenance. Same thing with a monk's robe. They only have a few robes that they carry with them, and those robes are just to keep them clothed and protect them from the elements. Do others as you would have them do to you. This is a great commandment, which Jesus' words are summed up in all of the commandments. All the commandments here can be subsumed within this. I think that this is another teaching that can be related in Buddhism, just again, back to the Four Noble Truths. Everyone is suffering. Understanding that if you were that person, you would want to experience love and compassion. Even if someone's being mean to you, especially if someone's being mean to you, you should understand that they're being mean to you because they are reacting negatively to a situation. Yes, that is their choice, but be compassionate towards them. Understand that that is their own mental issues, their own problems. And when you feel that and understand that in the moment, you can be more loving and kind to them. The next and last chapter, build your house on the rock. It's those who listen and apply his words into their actions. So right here, Jesus is pretty much saying again, actions are louder than words. action, not knowledgeable nor experience. It is the only assurance of blessedness. The Buddha said the same thing, just in different words. You have to walk the path. You have to do what I'm telling you to do to reach enlightenment. Furthermore, there's another really advanced Buddhist teaching when it comes to what's known as pagnya, or wisdom. It's at the very top tier of those 3 blocks I talked about earlier. You can listen to me, you can read about it in a book, but you'll never truly know the Dhamma or the truth without first understanding it for yourself experientially. And this can only be done through following the previous steps, holding a moral life, and meditating and having concentration. Then you can start to understand the pagnya, or insight, the truth, the wisdom of reality, the truth that everything is constantly changing, the truth that anatta, we are non-selves, this is just our body, this is just our forms, and the truth of suffering. Again, this is an advanced teaching, but I really like that there because Jesus is saying the same thing. You have to do it for yourself. You have to understand it for yourself. You can't just walk away and say, oh yeah, I got it. You have to practice and do it. Alright guys, that's the end of the video. I hope you guys enjoyed learning about Thomas Jefferson, the Buddha, and Jesus Christ, and how they are all related. My name's Bradley Marcus, and I like to teach people how to awaken to the happiness within themselves. So if that's of interest to you, check out some of my other videos, and I will talk to you soon. May you be well.